My name is Nikolai Voronin, and I have been working as a gamekeeper in Yakutia for almost 10 years now. I was once a very different person, an officer in the Soviet Army, serving in Afghanistan. The war left its scars, and not only on my body. After my return in 1988, I tried to live an ordinary life. I worked in the military commission, raised my son, made plans for the future, but fate ordered otherwise. The collapse of the Soviet Union completely changed the usual life. The unit was disbanded, wages were not paid for months. His wife Anna worked as a teacher, but even there, it was not easier. My son Igor, then already a high school student, was becoming more and more distant from me. He did not understand why we were living in such poverty when others were somehow getting along. The last straw was our quarrel. He said that he was leaving for Moscow, that he didn't want to live in poverty like me. We haven't spoken to this day. In those days, I often met Innokenty Sidorov, a Yakut, with whom I had once served as an enlisted man. He often came to our town on business. "Listen, Nikolai," he once said, "we need a gamekeeper, a military man, principled. We'll give you a place to live, a small salary but stable. Our places are wild and beautiful. Maybe your soul will rest." I thought about his proposal for a long time. Anna supported it. "Let's go," she said. "It won't get any worse." In her eyes, I saw the same determination with which she had once waited for me from Afghanistan. So in 1991, we found ourselves in Yakutia. The first time was hard. Harsh climate, half a year of winter, polar nights. But gradually, I began to realize that this was exactly what I needed. Everything here is honest, simple. The taiga does not tolerate falsity and weakness. It teaches the main thing: live according to your conscience, do your job, and nature will respond in kind. A lot has happened over the years. There were cases after which I did not sleep at night. There were moments when it seemed that everything was over, but I have never regretted my decision. The taiga has become my home, my refuge. And now I want to tell some stories. They are about how life changed here in the 90s, about people and beasts, about fear and courage, about the fact that sometimes the most terrible thing in the taiga is a man. The first year in the taiga was memorable for me forever, especially that incident in December of '91. I didn't know the area very well at that time. I was just getting used to it. Innokenty helped, of course, but most of the time I had to cope by myself. The winter was harsh even by local standards. The thermometer showed -50 or even lower. In such a frost, even birds do not fly. The forests seem to freeze. The silence is so quiet that you can hear the trees crackling from the cold. That day I checked the distant cordon. Anna packed me a thermos with hot tea, put a couple of sandwiches. "Be careful," she said in parting. During my time in Afghanistan, she had gotten used to letting me go with those words. I kissed her and walked out into the frosty darkness. The sun only shows for a couple hours this time of year. I rode the snowmobile to the old hunting hut. There the hiking trail started. Already after an hour of walking, I noticed tracks. A big moose had recently passed by. Strange, they usually stand in such a frosty place protected from the wind. I decided to check. Something was driving the beast in such weather. The trail led me to a hollow, and then I heard a faint cry. Human. I rushed to the sound as far as my equipment allowed. In about 10 minutes I saw him, a young fellow, a Yakut, sitting leaning against a tree. A rifle was lying next to him. The guy's name was Ison. He was about 20 years old. He tracked a moose, wounded it, but didn't kill it. He followed the trail and got lost. He had been wandering in the forest for several hours and was beginning to freeze. When I found him, he could hardly speak. Frostbite. I had to warm him up right away. I got a spare sweater, a thermos of tea, but I realized it wasn't enough. It's a long way to the hut. He won't make it. I had to remember my Afghan experience. He quickly built a shelter from spruce twigs from the wind and built a fire. In -50, it was a challenge. I rubbed his hands and feet, gave him hot tea. He gradually warmed up and began to talk. The family was starving, there was no work. He decided to get meat. "I know you can," he said, gritting his teeth. "But the children, you know?" By evening, the weather had turned bad. A blizzard had come up. Now we were both trapped. The radio didn't work because of the frost. Anna must be worried sick. All we could do was wait and keep the fire going. All night we sat by the fire. I told him about Afghanistan, about how we survived there. He told me about his family, about how they used to live under the Soviet regime, and how everything had changed. Toward morning, the snowstorm subsided. Ison could walk, though with difficulty. It took us several hours to get to the hut. From there, I radioed for help. When the rescuers arrived, Ison shook my hand. "I'm not a poacher anymore," he said quietly. "I'll find another way." A week later, he came to my house. He brought fish, some herbs, introduced me to his family. We've been in touch ever since. He kept his word. He got a job in an artel, started working honestly. That incident taught me a lot. I realized that everything is different here than in the big world. There's no black and white here. Sometimes a man commits a crime not out of greed, but out of desperation. And your task is not only to protect the law, but also to help people find the right path. The spring of '93 was hard. The snow melted slowly, revealing what winter had hidden. On one April day, a detour brought an alarming discovery. I found the remains of 3 musk deer on a distant site, near a tributary of the Intrigue River. The carcasses had been professionally cut up. Only the most valuable things had been taken: tongues, lips, antlers. I immediately realized that these were not locals. Poachers came serious. Traces spoke much: army boots, organized camp, special equipment. I reported to the center, but there was no help. Spring off-road, all roads were washed out. For a week I watched the site. On the 3rd day I noticed glimpses of a fire in the distance, but I didn't have time to get there. They were gone. The trail led to an abandoned prospector's hut. Everything indicated that the poachers knew the area and were preparing for a big hunt. I had learned one thing in Afghanistan: if the enemy is stronger, hit him not directly but by stealth. I started to prepare. I found all their trails, studied their routes, figured out where they could ambush animals. Inakenti helped. He brought old traps. Not for humans, of course, just to block the escape routes. The denouement came on the full moon. I heard gunshots around midnight. 3 men were driving a small herd of elk to the river. Classic pattern. They'd be ambushed there, but I was ahead of them. By the river, I'd set up flares on stretching rods in advance. When the first explosion went off, the poachers panicked. The animals scattered, and I turned on the hidden siren. In the darkness, with the siren wailing and the flashes of rockets, it seemed to them that they were surrounded by a whole militia squad. 2 of them I detained right by the river. They dropped their weapons and surrendered. The 3rd tried to run away but got caught in one of the traps. The old technique did not fail. The leader, the one who had been in the ambush, left, but without his prey and equipment. Later, when the police arrived, it turned out that the gang had been operating in several districts, ex-military like me. Only they had chosen a different path. The senior investigator shook my hand. "How did you manage to apprehend them?" I only grinned. The war taught me a lot, but the main thing is to protect those who are weaker. They found a whole warehouse in the poacher's hut. Hides, antlers, bear bile, all for sale to China. They used old army connections, had a cover, but out here in the taiga, none of that mattered. There are other laws here. After this incident, even those who at first were distrustful of the newcomer began to respect me, and I realized one more important thing. The taiga accepts not the one who is stronger, but the one who is more honest. February 1996 taught me a lesson that I remembered for the rest of my life. It all began with a message from an old Yakut named Scarier. Strange footprints were seen in the mountains on the day of the total eclipse. Huge, as if from a bear, but bears are sleeping at that time. The locals were alarmed. According to their beliefs, such signs are not good. I wouldn't have paid much attention to it, but 2 days later a group of geologists disappeared. 3 men left to explore an old mine tunnel and didn't return. It was -40 outside, even colder in the mountains. We couldn't wait. Taking everything I needed, I went to the search together with Inokenti and a young Yakut Urchiman who knew those places well. We found the trail of the geologist's snowmobile quickly, but it cut off at the entrance to the gorge. From there, we had to go on foot. An hour later, we saw those very tracks. Really huge, but there was something wrong with them. Urchiman took a closer look and turned pale. This is not a beast. It's a man, in bear skin. I remembered the stories about the hermits of the taiga, who sometimes go mad from loneliness. But why would he want geologists? The tracks led us to an abandoned eerie. It was dark and unnaturally warm inside. A flashlight beam picked out the geologist's abandoned equipment and signs of struggle from the darkness. "They're alive," Inokenti whispered, pointing to fresh footprints leading down into the depths. We were walking down the eerie when we heard a sound, a low ducking growl. Urchiman grabbed my arm. "He's here!" In the light of the lanterns, we saw him, a huge figure in a bearskin. Behind his back, in the depths of the eerie, sat the bound geologists. "These are my mountains," he bellowed in a hoarse voice. "They've come to look for gold. All of you are looking for gold, but it is cursed." I recognized that voice. 3 years ago, Mikhail, a prospector, had disappeared in the mountains. Everyone thought he was dead, but he must have survived but lost his mind. We had to act fast. I stepped forward. "Mikhail, remember me?" "I'm a gamekeeper. We met at the mine." He froze. "A gamekeeper? You protecting the mountains?" Something human flashed in his crazed eyes. I approached slowly, speaking in a calm voice. Told him how I too guarded these places, how I understood his desire to protect the mountains. Inokenti and Urchiman, meanwhile, were cautiously skirting around the edges of it. Suddenly, Mikhail rushed towards the geologist, drawing his knife. We rushed at the same time. The struggle was terrifying. Madness gave him inhuman strength. He managed to wound me with a knife on my arm, but the 3 of us disarmed him. The geologists were saved. Frostbite, exhaustion, but alive. Later, it turned out that Mikhail had indeed survived the collapse in the mine 3 years ago. His obsession with gold and loneliness drove him insane. He lived in caves, hunted, and when he saw people with devices, he attacked, believing he was protecting the mountains from desecration. He was sent to Yakutsk for treatment, and I got a scar on my arm and an understanding. Sometimes the worst demons live not in the taiga, but in people's souls. The taiga can drive those who come to it with greed crazy, and only respect for its laws helps to keep one's sanity. The fall of 1997 was unusually warm. It had not yet snowed in October, which is rare in our area. It was then that strange things began to happen. First, a hunter from a neighboring village disappeared. A week later, another one disappeared. The locals were worried, but they tried not to show it. That all changed when I found the first body. It was lying by an abandoned mine, covered with leaves. Death was clearly violent, signs of torture, hands bound. There was a bag of rock samples lying next to it. When the police arrived, The expert said that the murdered man was a geologist from Magadan. 3 days later, a second corpse was found. This time, it was a local hunter, but the picture was the same. Traces of torture, bound hands. I started gathering information. Inokenti helped me get in touch with the old-timers. Gradually, the picture became clearer. Illegal gold miners appeared in the taiga. They were looking for abandoned gold veins, and the witnesses were removed. One evening, an old Yakut, Prokopi, came to me. "Saw their camp," he said quietly. 5 men, all armed. The chief is the former head of the mine. He knows where to look. I contacted the militia, but they couldn't send reinforcements until 3 days later, off-road. The next morning, I found my house had been searched. Nothing was taken, only a note. "Keep out, gamekeeper." In the evening, Anna confessed that she had been followed as she walked from the store. I realized they knew where I lived. I had to act first. At night, I started following their camp. The smoke from the campfire helped me identify it. They weren't hiding much. 5 men, heavily armed, radios, metal detectors. The leader was indeed Savalov, the former head of the mine. I remembered him from the old days, a tough man with an unhealthy glint in his eyes. For 3 days I watched them. They methodically examined the old workings, took samples. Those who stumbled upon them by chance were interrogated, looking for information about the rich veins. Anyone who didn't talk, they killed. On the 4th day, they found a geologist who had come to our place to look for rare minerals. I knew him, a harmless scientist from Novosibirsk. We had to save the man. It was 24 hours before the police arrived. I decided to follow the same pattern as with the poachers. Not directly, but by stealth. I waited till night and started the operation. The first thing I did was to set fire to their camp on the leeward side. In the turmoil, they managed to get the geologist away. They kept him tied up in a tent, but they could not get away unnoticed. The chase began. The pursuers knew the terrain as well as I did, and they had the advantage of weapons. We crept through the darkness, now and then hearing gunshots and shouts behind us. Fortunately, their ammunition was not rubber. The swamp saved us. I knew a safe path. They did not. 2 of the pursuers fell in up to their waists. Their shouts attracted the others, and we were able to break away. By morning, we reached the cordon where the police were waiting. The gang was apprehended a day later. Savalov managed to get away, but they caught him on the highway. During the search, they found maps of old mine workings and gold. A lot of gold. As it turned out later, they operated not only in our area, but in other districts as well. They had 7 murders to their credit. When it was all over, an investigator from Yakutsk came to see me. "You know," he said, looking through the documents, "they found a really rich vein. They could have taken a license, worked legally. But greed?" I just nodded. The taiga doesn't forgive greed. Sooner or later it would charge its price. This story happened at the end of '99. I was just about to take my first vacation in 3 years. Anna had already bought train tickets to Novosibirsk. But the day before I left, I received a message. 2 people were missing from the old Severny mine. Formally, this mine was no longer in operation. It was closed back in '94, when gold stopped bringing profit. Only abandoned buildings, half-submerged mines, and rusty machinery remained. Locals didn't go there. They said it was a bad place. 2 young men from Yakutsk turned out to be missing. They came on their own to look for gold. Their car was found on an old road leading to the mine. In the trunk, equipment, a tent, a supply of food. But they just disappeared. I postponed my vacation and led the search party. Inokenti and 2 young hunters came with me. The trail led us to the main building of the mine, a hut with a fallen roof. Inside we found their camp. Sleeping bags, the remains of a fire, some maps. On the table, unfinished tea in mugs. It was as if the men had just stepped out for a minute. Looking around the barracks, I noticed an oddity. Fresh scratches on the floor, leading to an old safe in the corner. The safe was open and empty except for a scrap of paper with some numbers on it. Innocent took a closer look and turned pale. It's the code to the door to the lower mine tunnel. That's where the most valuable things were kept. At that moment, we heard a scream, muffled, as if from underground. One of the hunters grabbed my sleeve. "There's someone down there!" We rushed to find the entrance to the tunnel. We found it behind the barracks. The massive steel door was ajar. We turned on the flashlights and started to descend. The stairs went deep underground. The air was getting heavier and heavier, black mold on the walls. There was water dripping somewhere. There was that scream again, closer. On the third level, they found the first guy. He was lying unconscious near the fork. There were scattered tools and some documents. They brought him to his senses. He opened his eyes and immediately started shouting, "Vadim! He stayed there, in the far tunnel!" It turned out that they found old documents in the safe, a scheme which indicated a place with a rich gold mine. They decided to check it out, but they got lost in the mine and the light started to malfunction. Then they heard strange sounds, as if someone was walking in the dark. Vadim went to check and didn't return. Leaving one hunter with the injured, we moved on. In the far tunnel, the flashlights began to work intermittently. The beams were picking out from the darkness horrible pictures. Abandoned carts, collapsed beams, some bones. And there were footprints everywhere, fresh, but strange, like a man walking, dragging his feet. We found Vadim at the very end of the tunnel. He was alive, but in shock. He kept repeating, "He's here, the prospector." He won't let go. There were rope marks on his arms and legs. Someone kept him tied up. While they were taking the guys upstairs, I noticed a niche in the tunnel wall covered with planks. I shone my flashlight into it and recoiled. There was a skeleton in decayed clothes inside. Next to it was a pickaxe and an old notebook. The last entry read, "The gold is mine. I'll never give it to anyone. I'll be here forever." Experts later determined it was a prospector who disappeared in the 60s. Apparently, he found a rich vein, hid in the mine, and died there. Or maybe he didn't die. Local shamans say that greed can keep a soul on Earth. The boys were rescued, but they never returned to the mine. And other miners now avoid this place. They say that at night they can still hear footsteps and the sound of pickaxes. The old prospector is guarding his gold. It's been more than 10 years since I came to these parts. The 90s are behind me, a terrible but interesting time. The taiga has taught me a lot over the years. The main thing is that you can't lie here, neither to yourself nor to others. Nature sees everything, feels everything. Anna is still with me. She has survived all the difficulties, never complained. Now she runs the local library, teaches children to love books. And me. I'm still a gamekeeper. I can't imagine myself in any other role. My son. Igor and I have started to communicate a little bit. He came last summer, brought his grandson. The boy is delighted with the taiga, keeps asking to tell stories. Maybe he'll choose the same path someday. Innocenti says I've changed over the years. I've become calmer, wiser. That's probably true. The taiga has taken away my temper, my military toughness. In return, it gave me something more valuable. Understanding of life, its real laws. Many people ask me if I am not scared here. I always answer the same way. In the taiga, you should be afraid not of the beast, but of man. A beast kills to live. A man sometimes kills just for fun, out of greed, out of spite, out of stupidity. But even such people do not stay here for long. The taiga knows how to get rid of those who break its laws. Now, looking back, I realize that that conversation with Innocenti in '91 changed my whole life. And I am grateful to fate for this turn. Here, In the Yakut taiga, I found my place. Everything is real here. Dangers, joys, and friendship. Every morning I go out on my route. I follow familiar trails, check hunting areas, help those in trouble, and every time the taiga reveals something new to me. It is alive, it breathes, it remembers everything. And as long as such places exist on Earth, there is hope that not everything is lost in our complicated world. And the stories, they will continue. After all, the taiga never sleeps, and every day here can be the beginning of a new story. Friends, thank you for watching this video to the end. And what do you think? Will Nikolai Voronin's grandson follow in his grandfather's footsteps? And what happened to that hermit Michael after his treatment? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like the story, support the channel with a like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Next time we will tell you an equally exciting story about a mysterious discovery in the Siberian taiga. Take care of nature and remember, it sees everything. See you again.